Good morning, Grace Church. Good to see you. So, I want to begin with this. We live in an age of confusion. And as the great philosopher Yoda from Star Wars once said, the dark side clouds everything it does. And he's right. You know, the dark side is clouding a lot of things in our world. We live in an age of confusion. In fact, if you were to pick just one word that was a spot-on description of the times that we live in, you'd be hard-pressed to come up with something more accurate than confused. We're confused about a lot of things, aren't we? About what it means to be an American, what it means to be a good person, even what it means to be a man or a woman. And you know, the etymology, the root of the word confusion is very interesting. It's a combination of two Greek words. One is kon, which means with, and the other is fundere, which means to melt or to blend together. And so confusion is a blending of two things that don't belong together. So we have blended lies and truth to create a contamination of what was absolutely true to begin with. That's why Jesus came. He came to separate once and for all truth from lies and to eliminate our confusion. And in the Bible, when you look at confusion, it is always a mental and a spiritual condition. It takes the whole being. It affects all of us. And when we're confused, we start questioning truth altogether. As a matter of fact, that's what is perfectly captured here in John chapter 18. In verses 33 through 38, it says this: Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "It's your people and your chief priests that have handed you over to me. What is it that you've done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews, but now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You're right in saying I am a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this reason I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" Pilate asked, and he went out. So that question, what is truth? You know, it really rings through the ages, and it is as relevant today as it was back when Pilate said it. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that it was relevant when he said it, and it's still relevant today. I'm saying that it was relevant when he said it in 32 AD, and it's relevant today, but in between, it was irrelevant for a very long time because, in fact, for a couple thousand years as a civilization, we were quite sure most of the time really what truth was. We had a pretty good basic idea of it. So Pilate lived in a pre-Christian society that had yet to be penetrated by the piercing truth of Jesus Christ. And today, we live in a post-Christian society in which we no longer believe in the penetrating and piercing truth of Jesus Christ. And so that's so unfortunate because Jesus had this remarkable clarifying effect on the confused and chaotic world that he stepped into. He was like, a pool that was shocked by chlorine. He was an antiseptic to all of the confusion in the world. Theologically, he was able to convince everyone that the pagans, these gods of the pagans, were actually God. And he was able to preach his message of love instead of hating your enemies, and freedom instead of being captured by sin, and forgiveness instead of holding on to grudges, and holiness instead of living any way you want to. And he changed the world. His truth changed the world. But when we dethrone his truth, we return to the chaos and confusion of that pagan society. And that's in many ways where we are today. So remind me, what is Jesus' trademark phrase? Anybody remember? And I don't mean Nazareth, Jesus of Nazareth. He wasn't James Bond, right? What did he say? "Truly, truly, I say unto you," right? The truth, I tell you. This is what he said. He used this double emphatic 70 times and more in the New Testament. That's how important truth is to God. So that's my job today, to convince you of the critical importance of truth, about why God insists on it, about why Jesus is willing to die for it. And the answer actually is quite simple. You need truth. I need truth. Without it, we cannot have peace. So the question then before us today is this: who defines truth for you? Is it Christ or our culture? Because your answer to that question will determine so much about you, will determine your worldview, your outlook, your internal peace, your health, your joy, your quality of life, both now and for all eternity. So let's look at the evidence together. And let's, please, if you'd be kind enough, bow your heads with me and let us put the Lord in the lead as we ponder this question. Lord, we pray that you would open your word for us. Show us your truth, perhaps as never before. I pray that you would guide my words and soften our hearts to what you have for us. And thank you for sending Jesus, the truth, into the world for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, so let's answer Pilate's question. What is truth? Well, I like the Oxford definition, and Oxford Dictionary has 3 parts to it. It says, truth is conformity with fact or reality. It reflects the actual state of things. Truth is also a verified or indisputable fact, proposition, or principle, such as a mathematical truth. And thirdly, truth is that which contains no deception, flaws, contradictions, or inaccuracies. So in other words, truth doesn't contradict itself. So the bottom line is truth is a statement about reality. That's what truth is. So if truth is a statement about reality, well, what is reality? Well, reality is first and foremost, it is independent of our beliefs, ideas, or perceptions. Reality doesn't need us to verify it, to validate it, to see it, to experience it, to feel it. It just is. When a tree falls in the forest, that's reality, whether we saw it or not. God is real, whether we believe in him or not. He just is. And so we can say this then, that truth is that which describes what is. And it is there for us, by God's mercy, to discover. It's outside of us. It's an objective truth that we can discover together. But that's absolutely not the way our culture thinks about truth, is it? Not at all. Truth is not something out there to discover. It's something that we think about very differently. Truth is, in our culture, is no longer something we find. It's something we feel. Right? It's not objective. It's personal. It's internal. It's subjective. And so we would probably define something like this. You know, if you're talking to the man or woman on the street and you ask them what truth is, you know, you get a lot of looks, thoughtful looks, and they'd say, well, truth is what seems real to you. That's usually what you'll get when you talk to people who don't have a biblical worldview. And this, of course, is called relativism. It's where all points of view are equally valid, and all truth is relative to the person who believes it or says it. What's true for me might not be true for you, but both are considered equally valid. But there's a big problem with this. It's a big problem. It's a fatal problem, actually, because 2 opposite truths can't both be true at the same time. You know, the earth is either flat or it's round. One or the other. 2 + 2 = 4, or it doesn't. You can't have 2 contradictory answers to that question. Now, I know we live in Seattle, right? So we have a lot of smart people here. It's one of the most educated cities in America. A lot of linear thinkers here. So you're probably thinking, well, wait a minute, I don't know. Relativism, it doesn't apply to math or science. It just applies to morals or religion. All right, well, then let's look at that. The moment you start applying that same relativism to morals or religion, you still run up against a lot of really sticky questions. Child rape is either right or it's wrong. God either exists or he doesn't. Jesus is either the only way to heaven or he's not. All these things cannot be true at the same time. And what a lot of people, I think, fail to realize is that when you say, there are no absolute truths, when you say that, you're making an absolute truth statement. It refutes itself. I mean, think about it. Does it make any sense at all that the only thing that you can say that is true is that there's nothing that's true? Of course not. It makes no sense at all. So relativism collapses under its own weight, and yet we're always propping it up in our culture. And so it gets us more and more disconnected from reality. So what happens when you have a culture without truth? Well, I love to go up to Alaska in the summer and do some fishing, and you'll spend all day in the boat, and then you get on land and you're just doing this. You still feel the boat moving, right? That's an inner ear problem. It's an equilibrium problem. And a world without truth has one giant equilibrium problem. Our whole culture is seasick. And so you end up you're completely destabilized. And so the side effects of this seasickness are everywhere. They're all around us. I have just a few examples here, which I'll share with you, but I guarantee you, if you think about it, you'll think of many more on your own. So one of the things that we see, for example, in a society where we see eroding truth, is a breakdown of justice and law. We saw a lot of this in the last 5 years since the pandemic, and we had a lot of protests and all the various things, and all of a sudden things that were illegal were now suddenly okay somehow. And so what that means is that when truth isn't the standard, justice becomes negotiable. Laws shift with the cultural winds instead of standing on the moral foundations that we all have agreed to a long time ago. And so the result then of all this is that we tend to end up rewarding the guilty, and we end up punishing the innocent. And laws don't end up serving justice, they end up serving public opinion. But in Isaiah, he says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." And we also see another symptom of a breakdown in truth in our culture. We see a breakdown of personal responsibility. No one wants to own their mistakes. No one wants to own their own sin. Nobody wants to own their own stuff. And so when truth is subjective, it makes it very easy to justify poor behavior. Whatever somebody kind of feels defines their morality, no matter what that means for the consequences for other people. So that shows up in a lot of ways. It might mean that we let a thief off the hook because he's poor. Or it might mean you justify in your own mind cheating on your husband's okay because you need to feel attractive. Or it might mean that we condone rioting or looting because you happen to sympathize with the cause. But you see, the net of all these things is that people are avoiding accountability. No one repents because no one believes they're wrong. That's where we are in our society. But Proverbs says there is a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death. What often feels right in the moment, if it doesn't hold up to God's law, you're going to find out it doesn't end well. And lastly, a third example is we see of a breakdown in truth in our culture is that we see confusion in our identity, who we are and what's our purpose. And I think, this might actually be the most devastating consequence of having truth erode in our culture. Christians know we're so blessed with the true fact that we're made in the image of God. We don't have to question our identity, our purpose. We know our identity. We're a child of God. Praise the Lord. And we don't have to question our purpose. I'm here to serve him, to partner with him, and enjoy him. What a glorious purpose that is. But when we stop putting God and seeing God as the source of truth, and we start seeing ourselves as the source of truth, things break down fast. In relativism, what it says is, look inside yourself to find the truth. But that's like asking a compass to decide where north is. It's a very difficult proposition. In fact, it's impossible. Without God, we become lost. We don't know who we are or why we're here or where we're going. And our overall well-being begins to suffer greatly. It becomes overwhelming for us. Paul tells us in Romans, he says in Romans 1:25, he says this, and I'll pull it up for you. Let me find it here. No, it's not that, sorry. Well, I seem to have gotten out of order here. Well, that slide seems to be missing. So this is what it says. The Bible's still there, even if my slide isn't. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the created things rather than the Creator who is forever praised. Amen. So they exchange the truth for a lie, and this tragic exchange, this truth for a lie, causes a downward spiral that defines our time. You know, you think about all of the things that we see plaguing our country. You know, things like identity crises and gender confusion and this loss of meaning and purpose and an unprecedented mental health care crisis. You know, we have more mental health care facilities and capabilities in America than any country in the history of the world, and yet we have more mental health crises than probably anywhere in the history of the world. And it's not just theory, it's measurable. Some of the statistics that have come out recently are just very sobering. You know, when you look at high school students, for example, when it comes to depression and anxiety, 42% of American high school students say that they feel consistently sad or hopeless. 42%. And it spikes to 57% when you're talking about females. Almost 6 in 10 American high school girls say they feel consistently sad or hopeless. That's many of our daughters right there. I know it's mine. Or what about loneliness? You know, loneliness, 1 in 2 American adults report feeling consistently or extremely lonely. In fact, it's such a problem that the Surgeon General declared it a public health emergency in 2023 because the side effects are so destructive to our mental health and our physical health. And we see a lot of rage and division in our country. You know, 76% of Americans feel angry or deeply frustrated with society because we don't feel connected. We don't feel like we have anything in common anymore. And 1 in 5 adults say they've ended a relationship over political or social disagreements. 1 in 5. And then, of course, we see the family breakdown. Not only do we still see divorces in about the 50% range, but 40% of children now are born out of wedlock in America compared to 20% when I was a kid. And that also, tragically, is about 77% for African American children. It's incredibly destructive. And as a result of a lot of these things, the majority of millennials and Gen Z now, they prefer living together to marriage because they don't trust the institution anymore. They don't trust it. And of course, we have gender identity confusion, which is the latest kid on the block. And over 5% of adults, 30 years age of under in the U.S., they identify as either transgender or non-binary, and that number is even higher for teenagers. And you have almost 7% say they're not sure what gender they are. It's a big number. These are very profound symptoms of an equilibrium problem, of a world without truth. Francis Schaeffer, the great Christian theologian and philosopher, he made an analogy. He pointed to a Roman bridge that was still standing after 2,000 years. And he said, and they're all over Italy and even Britain, maybe you've seen them. And those bridges, which are still standing, but they were built for carts and for horses and for people to walk across. But you put one modern truck across it and boom, it's going to fall right down. And his whole point is that bridge is your worldview and your grasp of truth. That's your bridge. So the question becomes, is your bridge, is your grasp of truth strong enough to bear the weight of all that the world throws at you? Because right now in our culture, we put so much pressure on just basic truth. Basic truth. When you start questioning if you're a human being or not. I'm not sure what a furry is. I'm not sure. I'm not sure they know. And if it weren't so tragic, it might be humorous, but it's not. It's ultimately tragic because it's so removed from God's truth. But it wasn't always this way. It wasn't. You know, for centuries, we believed in a transcendent truth, right? A truth that applies to everyone. And that was true whether you were a Christian or an atheist or anywhere in between. And so scientists and psychologists and philosophers and theologians, we all believed that a truth existed and we could find it. And that common belief in truth and a lot of the things that we discovered that are true were the bonds that tied us together. But now, we deny the existence of this transcendent truth, and so we can't agree on any truth. That's what we've arrived at, this very difficult time. And here's the thing. Relativism may feel humble. It might feel humble to say, you know what, I'm not gonna say what's true for you, and you can't say what's true for me. That might feel humble, but here's the reality. It's actually very arrogant, because what you're actually saying is, no one can tell me what's true, not even God. God can't correct me. That's what relativism actually means. And then you add to that the fact that we have this suspicion in our modern culture that anything that came before, any values that came before us, are somehow now wrong, immoral, and worthless. And so we're unwilling to return to them, even if they're right. We're unwilling to do that. So instead, we train our students to deconstruct society, to tear it all down, to replace it. And destruction may feel like progress, but it's actually regression. In many ways, if you have a progressive worldview, I understand. There's some things that need to be changed. There's some things we need to improve. But so often, to be a progressive person means to go back to the road you were on when you get lost. If you're lost, the best, most progressive thing you can do is go back to the road that you lost your way from. And that's what God's word is, and that's what we must do as a society. So then, what does the Bible say about truth? Well, the first thing it says is truth is not relative, it's absolute. And truth is not personal, it's universal. And it's not abstract, it's hard as concrete and cold as steel. That's what Jesus brought. He brought this incredible truth, and perhaps most controversial of all in our culture is that Jesus made it clear that there are, in fact, only two sides, truth and everything else. There's truth and there's lies. And there's not many truths and there's not many sides. There is only God's truth and everyone and everything else. Jesus himself said in John 18:37, see if I can find it. There we go. Back on track. He said this, "The reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." Two sides. And what he's saying here is really astonishing. What does the word testify imply? A trial. What was on trial? Truth itself. And that shouldn't surprise us, because from the Garden of Eden to the cross of Christ, the truth has always been under assault. What did Satan say in Genesis 3:1? He said, did God really say? The accuser. He's at work. The first thing he attacked was what? Truth. Why did he do that? Because he knew what was at stake. He knows if you know the truth, if you're thinking clearly about yourself and God, things are going to go pretty well. But what Satan figured out is he said, hey, there's no need to destroy a man if I can get him to destroy himself. All I got to do is fill him full of lies and get out of the way. And ever since then, he's been sowing this confusion in our world. Jeremiah says, truth has perished. Isaiah says, truth has stumbled in the streets. It's nowhere to be found. That describes our world today, doesn't it? And our whole being is saturated with sin, so we naturally reject the truth. Paul says in Romans, it says, the mind governed by the flesh is hostile to God. So the mind that has no notion of truth is hostile. And worse still, one of the few things that sometimes people agree on is that we'll simply collude together and scheme together to destroy the truth, to suppress the truth. Paul says this. He says, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Why would we do that? Why would we suppress the truth? Why would we resist it to the point that we deny it even exists? Why in the world would we do that? It's something that's good, but we call it bad. And it's something that we need, but it's something that we reject. We treat it like it's radioactive. Why do we do that? Because in our pride, we'd rather deny the very existence of truth than to have it rule over us. Truth requires surrender, and we don't want that. No, even if it means destroying ourselves. So instead of submitting, we suppress. We replace divine truth with personal preference, and we replace health with hell. We replace it with hell. When we do that, then we start to really suffer mentally, Emotionally, spiritually, physically, the whole system breaks down and all creation groans. This isn't in my notes, but that's what happened to me when I denied God's truth. My whole system broke down. I found myself crying out to God, God, please help me. I don't believe in you, but I'm asking you, if you're real, help me. And he did. And his truth came into me, and it changed everything. His truth has the most clarifying, his truth is a salve. Jesus came when he stepped into the world and all this chaos and confusion. He brought this clarity. Just as Satan came, he wanted to destroy you by destroying truth. Jesus wants to rescue you by rescuing truth. That's why he came. He says it in his own mouth. In John 14:6, test me on this. I don't know if there's a clearer statement about truth and more helpful one in all the Bible than this one. I am the way and the truth and the life, says Jesus. No one comes to the Father except through me. This is profound. This is true insight from God that could not just come up and arise in a human mind. This is insight that is so powerful and so useful, because what it means is this. Truth is not just a set of principles. It's a person. Jesus Christ. Think about that. Take him at his word. Take him literally. He's the embodiment of truth. He doesn't just tell the truth. He is the truth. He is. All truth is found in him. Nothing but truth exists in him. And no truth exists apart from him. He is the source of it. He's the font of truth. And it all flows from there. And you know, for centuries we understood this. In Western civilization we had a lot of problems, don't get me wrong. But we did tend to have a belief in truth. And Francis Schaeffer he has what I call the waterfall of beliefs. This is the way it was from basically the early church to about World War I, is that we had Jesus as the center of Western theology, and that gave clarity. And the headwaters of that then spilled down into philosophy. Philosophers would talk about that. Aquinas and Augustine and so many great minds would wrap their brains around it and write about it and think about it. And then they infused and inspired the artists. And then the artists inspired the musicians. And then all that spills down into our culture and our politics. The headwaters were pure. And so what flowed down through, it got dirtier as it went, but the headwaters were good. And we saw the strength in our culture as a result. But now our culture has the wrong headwaters. Now it looks like this. We've taken off theology. And so we just leave thinkers, the experts, the think tanks, our modern philosophers, whomever they might be. Some of them are journalists, some of them are other. But then they're now bitter and they're angry. And they don't know what to make of the world. They have no idea because the headwaters are gone. So I'm the headwater. And so they're now influencing the artists and the musicians and our politics. And now we have churches at the bottom who are just trying to keep up. I want to be relevant. Just trying to be influenced by the headwaters of philosophers. And see, the headwaters, if they're bitter and godless, then everything downstream is going to be poisoned as a result. That's what's going to happen. It can only yield despair and destruction. And in fact, our philosophers are producing the worst philosophy of all, nihilism. If you want to understand the dry rot in our culture, just look at the headwaters where all the stuff's coming from, and you'll figure it out. And so during this series on truth, I want to take a moment to highlight one big lie in our culture. And this week, I'm going to choose one of my favorite ones. I think if you've been around me, you might have been, I've taught a number of classes on it, and maybe you've seen me talk about it. And it's always a bit tricky because there's a lot of nuances to some of these points. And so if I say anything that offends you, I apologize in advance, and I'm welcome to talk to you about it. But what I want you to do is look at the big picture. I want to talk about, just for a moment, about Marxism. Now, you might be saying, Marxism? What does that have? Is that even a thing anymore? That guy died a long time ago. What does that matter? Well, why it matters is that Marxism is alive and well, and it is the number one competing worldview against Judeo-Christianity in America today. It is all over the place, and it repackages itself and rebrands itself in a number of different ways. It can be called socialism. communism, authoritarianism in all its forms, extreme feminism, extreme gender and queer movements, political correctness, cancel culture, green movement, globalism, CRT, even Black Lives Matter, the organization, not the cause, but the organization itself, and wokeism. All of these things grow out of the stump that is Marxism. And it's very important to understand that Marxism is not now and never was totally about economics. It's always been to tear down the institutions that God ordained, namely church, family, and truth itself. Noelle Mering, the writer, she said it so well. She said, Marxism is an ideology of rupture. Its whole point is to destroy, often with no clear idea of what to replace things with. So it'd be fair to ask, well, why does Marxism want to destroy America? Why does Marxism want to destroy the West? And it's a complex answer, and it's got a lot to it, but I'll leave you with this morning. Marxism is an atheistic worldview that despises the authority of God, and it wants to replace that with the authority of man. Marxism, in all of its forms, it hates the Bible. It hates holiness. It hates families and tradition and institutions and worship and church. Karl Marx himself was a militant atheist, and he famously said, religion is the opiate of the people, meaning you're high if you believe that stuff. And he and his followers, they believe that all of these good things ordained by God, they stand in the way of a man-made Tower of Babel that we can produce right here on earth, our own utopia, our own perfect human creation. But if you've ever had the lenses of God put on your eyes and you're able to see the world somewhat from his perspective, you know that that is an illusion. Human beings need God. There is no way that something as broken as we are could produce something perfect. We need God. But to destroy God's truth, then, they must confuse his truth with lies. And that's why new generations keep replacing and repackaging this thing to take hammer blows to our culture and to the institutions that God's ordained. So where did it come from? Where did Marxism come from? Well, I'll keep it very brief. Of course, it came from Marx, Karl Marx, right, and his partner Friedrich Engels. He started off with putting his theory out there, and a communist think tank in Frankfurt, Germany, known as the Frankfurt School, began to get really serious about how do we spread this. And then they realized that the biggest target for communism at the time was America. And so they said, let's move the Frankfurt School from Frankfurt to Columbia University in New York City in 1935. And then a man 30 years later named Rudi Dutschke began to get really serious, and he created a strategy that he called the Long March Through the Institutions. And the whole idea of this was to Marxify America, one institution at a time. Their goal was to take down the West. That meant dismantling family, church, free market capitalism, and democracy, because those were bulwarks against Marxism being successful. And their strategy was to replace objective truth with an ideology of revolution. And lastly, their tactics were to take over education, media, and pop culture. Now, you might be thinking, well, it's a pretty big strategy, right? Take over education, media, and pop culture. That sounds pretty undoable until you realize they did it. They actually did it. If you look back at the way that the world was in our media, in our education, in our pop culture, before this started happening, particularly in the 1950s and before, it was all different. And there's some ways here that we can see it. First, the first thing they wanted to do by using these tools is they wanted to rewrite the family. Why? Because the family is a school of love. It's a school of truth. And if you want to do a revolution, you need to break that apart. That was the number one thing that they wanted to do. So how they do that? Well, they want to separate husbands and wives. They want to make divorce easy. They want to make abortion super easy. They want to make everything in our lives easy to separate. They want to pit parents from children, and they want to portray the family as oppressive rather than supportive. And we see it in a lot of ways, the way that we denigrate men in our culture, the way that we disparage traditional wives, the way that we promote abortion as a virtue instead of a tragedy. We even erect privacy laws between parents and kids. And we do all this, and I want to be very clear that there's a lot of nuance to some of these things, and there are times where kids actually do need to be protected from abusive parents. That happens. But I also know that this battle is real. And so if we know that it's real, then we can actually take it seriously. If you want to know more, there's a book by Noel Meering called Awake Not Woke. It's brief, full of great information. I'd encourage you to read it if you want to know more of this on your own. But understand this, that much of the heavy lifting of dismantling our families has been done, unfortunately, by our own government and by a number of unions that get in the way. And I like unions. Unions are good. But when they turn on the family, it becomes something very, very serious. And so we end up having then a reprogram of education. That was the second thing they wanted to do. Started in higher education, universities and high schools, and then it comes all the way down into elementary classes. And so schools end up becoming, in some ways, laboratories for creating activist students. One of the biggest questions that you can ask children these days is, what are you going to do for environmental justice, for example? Not, what did you learn today? So we're teaching kids to do these things. And so in the process, the byproduct is that kids are being encouraged, either directly or indirectly, to distrust their parents' authority and sometimes even their own biology. And thirdly, they wanted to recast pop culture. And entertainment began to be replaced. We used to have biblical tradition things, movies like Ben-Hur. I don't think that would be made today. Well, maybe The Chosen is changing that. That'd be great. But by and large, Hollywood has changed completely. Art no longer reflects beauty anymore. You think back to the Renaissance, it was so beautiful. They were exploring what God had made. It was so beautiful. And now you look at modern art, and much of modern art is what? It's portraying dysfunction and brokenness and cynicism and social critique. If you're not critiquing, you're not intelligent. That's the point that we've come to. Movies like It's a Wonderful Life give way to movies like The Shape of Water, which won Best Picture a few years ago. It was about a woman who has a sexual affair with a fish. I guess she thought it was better to date a mackerel than a man. Not sure what they're trying to say there, but I do know this, it's heartbreaking. Because it means that we have lost all sight of the glory that God has for us. There was a scene in the Francis Schaeffer video on this topic that it just crushes me. There was a lovely young woman, an actress, and she was taking part in some movie, and they were throwing dung at her face. She was tied to a pole. And I thought, wow, if I've ever seen a scene in which a dignified human being is being completely degraded, it's that. We've lost all sight of being made in the image of God. And so we end up despising ourselves because we don't understand ourselves. We don't know our purpose, and so we end up despising each other in the process. Losing sight of our purpose is an absolute tragedy for the human spirit. So how do we recover our truth in a post-truth world? How do we do that? We return back to the path that we lost our way from, and we go back and return to Jesus. That's what we do. Why? Because Jesus is the truth. He's our source. The closer we are to him, the closer we are to truth. During the Civil War, a Civil War general said to Lincoln, he said, "May God be on our side." You might know this. And Lincoln said, "No, may we be on his." You see, that's how we have to think about truth. God has the truth, we don't. Oftentimes we think we do, but we're wrong all the time, aren't we? All the time. We're fallen people who fall for people who lie. We do that all the time. But the closer we get to him, the closer we all get to truth. If we approach him with humility and earnestly, and we do that together, we come to the truth together. That's the beauty of what God has put in us. But you know what? The problem is our culture tells us to turn inward to find the truth, right? You want to know who you are? You want your authenticity? Turn inward. But here's the problem. Inward is where all the confusion lies. Don't go there. Instead, the gospel tells us to go up, to look up to Christ. because that's where the real truth is. Then we can know who we are. We can know why we're here. We can know what our purpose is. It's only in Christ that our life makes sense. So let me ask you, have you tried looking inward for your identity only to end up more confused? I've had that very conversation with my daughters. Have you followed our culture's compass only to still feel lost? Has your truth led to peace, or do you feel tied up in anxiety? Because Jesus, if your answer to that is yes, he's saying, come to me. Come to me. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Only in truth is there freedom. Isn't that right? Even if it's hard to learn the truth, don't you feel better? There's a freedom in that. Everything else is an illusion. Everything else will turn on you. And here's what Jesus says about truth, the master truth. He says these three things about truth as we close. Truth is personal. Jesus doesn't speak about truth. He just is the truth. And so everything he says is true. So if you want the truth, go to him. And Jesus says truth is exclusive. There's no other way to heaven. Christianity isn't one of many truths. It's the truth because it's based on truth himself. And the claim may feel offensive to our culture. I know. But it brings clarity to the soul. And lastly, Jesus says truth is foundational. All of our morals and all of our beliefs and all of our purpose, they flow from him like the source of truth. So what do we do with all this? How do we think about this and put it to use in our life? Well, if you find yourself losing your equilibrium, which is so easy to do, you read the news, you get discouraged. You log on to TikTok, maybe you have friends or family, or you go to a job every day and you're getting on that boat and there's all kinds of non-truths mixing with your truths and you start losing your way. What do? You go back to Jesus. You go to the source of truth. Because the world definitely wants to confuse you. Put all kinds of stuff and mix it in there. But what we can do is we can build your house on his rock, and you cannot be tossed around. Make him the captain of your boat, and he will rebuke the storm, he'll calm the waves, and he'll give you your equilibrium. That's what he promises to do. When he says, my peace I give you, and I am the truth, these things are combined. Know that he will center you. If you're wrestling with anxiety and despair, rather than trying another coping technique, ask yourself, what lie am I believing right now? And if you want peace, remind yourself of this. Peace is the effect, but truth is the cause. Truth comes first, and peace is the result. And lastly, when you're tempted to conform to the world, remember that what's popular isn't always true, and what's true isn't always popular. God has a way of bobbing to the top every time. So when you're seasick, that breakdown that you feel within you, in your spirit, it doesn't come from just social issues. It comes from a truth vacuum. So you need to go back to the truth. Without truth, we have pain, but with it, we have peace. And everybody wants peace. Amen? I'd like to call the worship team up. We're going to take part in communion, and I want to leave you with this final word. From a dark world full of deceit, Jesus still says, I am the truth. So when the chaos is loud and the lies multiply, may we remember that the truth is not an idea to defend, it's a person to trust. And our big idea this morning is this. Truth has a name, and his name is Jesus Christ. We are going to take part in communion this morning. At Grace Church, we do what's called intinction. We actually take a piece of the bread and we dip it into the juice, which represents the wine. And what is communion all about? Communion is a reminder from Jesus to come to his table, to share a moment with him. As often as you eat, think about him. If something as simple as bread and something as refreshing and elemental as wine or whatever you're drinking, know that he calls you to this table, and this week he's calling you to be reminded that he's the truth. Whatever you have in your head that might be dragging you down, what lie am I believing right now? Don't take my word for it. Take his word for it. Go to his word and look. And so as you come forward to the communion table this morning, I would ask for you and encourage you to think about what it is that you can release to God. What truth are you having of his? Are you having a difficult time maybe accepting? Because on the night that he was betrayed, he took the bread and he said, "This is my body, broken for you." The truth is that you are so irredeemably flawed that I have to save you. But the truth is you're so impossibly loved that I'm going to do it. And his body was broken. And then he took the cup and he said, "This is my blood poured out for you. And I spill it willingly because it cleanses your world, cleanses your spirit, and allows us to enter his world." Would you please rise and come join me at God's table?
is a lamp unto my feet and the